and I'm going to hand over to Charmaine to start the morning for us. Thanks, Charmaine.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to present at this workshop. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and acknowledging the elders on the land at which we meet. So today I'm going to share with you our experiences on a proof of concept project study on acute coronary syndrome. Do I have the slide control now?
Yes, you should.
So today I'd like to share with you our experiences of a proof of concept project study. Sorry, there's just a bit of a lag. Yep. On acute coronary syndrome, I'm going to share with you some of the software that we developed to achieve the project goals and also the type of skill sets that are required to extract data from electronic medical records for performing clinical analytics and also developing virtual registries. And I guess I wanted to remind you that the majority of the data in the eMR is structured and unstructured. So mostly administrative data sets have been focused on the structured data elements, but the eMR is also comprised of over 70% of unstructured data, and that's comprised of the clinical documentation and also reports and images, and that's going to be featured in today's talk. So this is a paper published in New England Journal of Medicine in 1965, and already in 1965 they were talking about harnessing the use of electronic medical records and processing them for clinicians, quality improvement and research. And already in 1965 they were talking about the tremendous accumulation of data, which was reflected with more advanced laboratory procedures, the changing emphasis of medicine from acute to chronic problems, and then the increased recording of these observations and the challenges associated with organising that into a patient-centric view. And the next slide is an example of a case report form, which many of you who work in clinical trials and registries are familiar with and know that all these data elements have to be carefully curated and collected for these clinical trials and registries. And what we'd like to do is to automate this process and standardise it. And so the way that we did that, started that process was through a proof of concept feasibility project called Speed Extract, which stands for STEMI, Patient Electronic Data Extraction. This was a proof of concept project that was funded by the Ministry of Health, as well as a couple of other funding agencies, including Sydney Health Partners and the University of Sydney, where we looked at a 3-month historical data set of data extracted from electronic medical records, and we wanted to test the feasibility of being able to accurately identify over 70% of patients with an ST elevation myocardial infarction from existing electronic medical record data. And we also wanted to test the aim of whether we were able to use this extracted data to measure some clinical quality indicators. And pertinent to this presentation, the information that was required for a STEMI diagnosis is the clinical presentation, so the presenting symptoms, troponin changes through pathology results, and an ECG finding. This is an overview of the project timeline. So it took us about 15 months to go through ethics and governance through 2 local health districts. We started getting data coming in the middle of July 2018. We started off with a 3-month test extract, and then ECGs started coming in about 6 months later. And then we turned this into 2 quality and safety reports using eMR data. This year we've scaled that approach to a 2-year historical extract, so repeating the same process, and we've recently just gotten a 5-year extract of data into LHDs. And at the same time as doing that, we've been sharing our code with 2 other LHDs in order to do a similar approach. So that's kind of giving you an idea of the kind of time frame of these types of studies. For those of you who haven't worked with electronic medical record data before, this visualization shows you, I guess, how it comes out of the system after it's been extracted and linked. So this is coming from the Cerner eMR system, and as you can see, it comes out in tables. The 2 main tables are encounters and patients, and the encounter represents the patient's presentation to hospital or the either ED or the inpatient or community encounter, and then there's patient level information. All the, I guess, information of interest comes out as separate tables. So for instance, the diagnosis comes out all together. So all the ICD-10 codes and SNOMED codes, all the forms come out together. So for instance, the ED assessment forms and the triage forms and the discharge summaries come out. And so for instance, in this 3-month extract, there were over 300 types of forms, which is 81 million forms altogether. All the pathology results come out together, all the notes come out together. So that's all the progress notes, the medical notes, consult notes, nursing notes, they come out all together, and then there's many different types. And then in this particular LHD, the ECGs are captured on paper, is a mixture of paper and digital. So we have ECG images to work with, which have been scanned. So the first step was to identify all the potential presentations of suspected acute coronary syndrome. Because we didn't just want to rely on defining our cohort by using ICD-10 codes or discharge diagnoses, we designed a broad, I guess, inclusion criteria to identify the presentations of these patients. So we used 7 inclusion criteria, which we used in the EMR. So some of these were related to having a related cardiac procedure. This inclusion criteria is related to having a relevant ICD-10 code or a SNOMED code. Related orders is related to cardiac-related orders, so things like troponins or stress tests. Then we also had a very broad criteria which we searched in the triage assessment for a whole host of cardiac keywords and symptoms, and you can see those listed here. We also included all the abbreviations and misspellings and additional keywords. And then also we looked at the presence of whether that presentation had a scanned ECG. And what this upset plot shows is you can see all the presentations that met each of these inclusion criteria demonstrated here. If we had only extracted, and this is the cohort that was defined by having a positive ICD-10 code or SNOMED code for acute coronary syndrome. So I guess this, so a classic, I guess, STEMI presentation would meet a criteria saying that they would have, say, a diagnosis, a relevant
Charmaine, there is no audio.
Of the cohort are transfers. And they're captured as separate encounters in the EMR. We had to stitch them together computationally. So we designed a new linkage ID, which we called a journey ID. And this slide just shows you kind of the different types of episodes of care that we see. So we see some instances where there's single facility episodes of care, which you can see here. There's some cases of people being transferred. So this is one encounter, and then being transferred to a different hospital. So we connect those 2 encounters together. And then of course there's, I guess, what you see in the data is overlapping episodes of care, which is people who are actually look like on the timestamps that they are in 2 separate places at the same time, but they're not. And so So this is just something to be mindful of when you're looking at EMR data, is that these sorts of things can occur and you have to address them. So we just take note of them and know that they know that that is one episode of care. So the first step was to perform a validation study of the ICD-10 coded STEMIs. So what we did was that what we were interested in looking for missed ICD-10 coded STEMIs, as we hypothesized that they may not be completely reliable. So we designed and built a web user interface where we captured ECGs, first medical notes, blood tests, angiogram reports, and discharge letters for each episode of care. And then we had 4 raters, junior clinicians, review these cases and put them into diagnostic categories. STEMI and STEMI unstable angina and other. And the goal of this analysis was to derive a labeled data set that could be used to train algorithms to identify clinician labeled STEMIs. In the top right hand corner, I'm just showing you kind of what in each slide I'll show you what it looks like in the case report form, just so you kind of have an idea of how much work goes into replicating what goes into the case report form. So what we showed in this study was that the ICD-10 STEMI sensitivity was 94% during this process, and that we could use, actually the ICD-10 codes could be effectively used to identify patients with a STEMI. And we identified some false negative STEMIs as well as some false positive STEMIs. And in principle, we could now use these ICD-10 codes to train a machine learning algorithm to accurately identify STEMIs using this EMR data with a high level of accuracy. So the next part of the project was to examine whether this data could be used to measure clinical quality safety indicators for acute coronary syndrome. So you may be familiar with these guidelines put out by the Australian Commission of Clinical Quality and Safety. And we looked at these guidelines and we chose indicators that could be potentially measurable in the EMR. So for instance, ECG performed within 10 minutes of arrival, timely reperfusion. So did STEMI patients receive a door-to-device time within 90 minutes, and then whether they were discharged on relevant medications. So, and this is related to the case report form, where you would be collecting the date of the index ECG or the time of the ECG. So for this particular, these particular LHDs, we retrieved scanned ECG images. So we had to locate the timestamp of the image that had been scanned in. So we used some off-the-shelf software to do this, and we did have some challenges. So firstly, we had to de-identify the barcode. There you can see in the top left-hand corner. So we also had to develop the software to find the location of the timestamp. So because scanned images are imperfectly scanned, so they're not symmetrical, we had to identify landmarks within the ECG in order to find the timestamp itself. We were working with ECGs from 2 local health districts, so there's huge variability in the ECG machine readouts. And what you can see here is, I guess, our early attempts at trying to find this timestamp. So you can see the variability here. Some people have AM, PM. This pink scans are ambulance ECGs versus inpatient ECGs. We've got hole punches. We've got scribbles. So there's a lot, I guess, for each of these particular, ECG types, we developed algorithms to extract our data from these images. And so, and also the quality of the image is variable. So once we've developed these, this software, we're able to determine to some degree the time to ECG. And so what you can see here is the proportion of self-presenting patients who received an ECG within 10 minutes, and then the proportion of patients who arrived by ambulance who received an ECG within 10 minutes. And of course, some of these results are affected by our software itself, so it's still in development, and also the triage category of presentation. So the next thing we wanted to do was to capture the door to balloon time. So we we extracted data from multiple information systems here. So the information system in the cath lab and also the Cerner EMR. And you can see here once we kind of massage that data, we can extract out the door to balloon time for patients who present to a PCI capable facility versus those who present to a district facility prior to a PCI capable facility. The last indicator we're interested in was medications at discharge. So what we did was we extracted out all the discharge letters. We looked at the medications table at the bottom of the discharge letter to see what medications that patients were discharged on. We extracted out all the unique medication names. Then they were mapped to, I guess, groups. And here you can see from that mapping process the proportion of patients that were discharged on aspirin, dual antiplatelets or statin for this particular group of STEMIs. And I guess after this process, we have all the medications mapped for this entire cohort, not just the cardiovascular medications. And then we find, I guess we stumble upon quite a lot of findings serendipitously as we're doing this work. So for instance, one of the endocrinologists was interested in the screening of and management of diabetes in patients with AMI. And so what you can see here is a river plot where we looked at diabetes status at admission, whether that's, and that was defined using HbA1c or medications. We can see the proportion of those who don't have those patients with presenting with an acute myocardial infarction. We can see those who do not have an HbA1c test. We can see those that do have a positive HbA1c test, and then we can in this middle circle, and then we can track those who do have a raised HbA1c test but aren't discharged on diabetic medications. So these are the sorts of, I guess, insights that we can gain from tracking data during the episode of care from the EMR. So another large piece of work that we've done was trying to, I guess, look at text mining in the clinical documentation. And the first use case that we did for this was looking at what symptoms patients present with. We started off with the triage form just because that's only a couple of sentences, and we wanted to identify patients who present with acute chest pain or other symptoms associated with acute coronary syndrome. And this is part of, I guess, identifying a cohort of patients that present with these symptoms. The things that we had to take into account was the nature of the chest pain, the location and the pain of the pain and the radiation, associated features, exacerbating relieving factors, and also the timing. And so these were the kind of considerations that we took into for our rule-based algorithms. So the first step was to identify the symptoms and keywords. We used fuzzy text matching to identify potential words. As you would expect, there was a lot of typos in the medical notes in the triage form, and this word cloud is showing you the 32 different ways that chest pain is represented in our cohort. The next step was to try and put these into context. So for instance, we would identify the symptom itself, and then we would develop rules for our algorithm to classify that particular presentation into high, low, or medium risk of cardiac-related chest pain. So just to show you an example here, this would be what the triage note looks like. The AMBO onset 1.5 hours ago, chest pain worsening in nature, left-sided. Our algorithm our rule-based algorithm that we designed would pick up the chest pain. It would pick up the left-sided nature of that chest pain, identify this sentence as being a high risk, and then classify that particular presentation as being a high risk of cardiac chest pain. And we can do the same for low chest pain, low risk cardiac related chest pain, as well as combinations of those. And from this, we developed 36 different symptom keyword searches, which accommodates the abbreviations and misspellings. And from this, we can identify our cohorts of patients that present with high risk or low risk or not of cardiac related chest pain. So I won't go over this slide, but I just wanted to say that a lot of the, I guess, the fields in the in the case report form for cardiac, for registries are captured in the medical notes. And so we have been spending a fair bit of, I guess, exploration doing this process. And these are just some of the things that we would like to be capturing from the clinical documentation. So this is a use case that I talked about where we try to identify a cohort of patients with presenting symptoms. But we also want to describe the patient, their risk factors and medical history, inform on the mode of presentation, I guess, understand what happened to them while they were in hospital, identify complications and examine plans at discharge. And some of these things are really only measured in the clinical documentation. However, during this process, we've also come across quite a few challenges and considerations, and these are emerging, and this is very much an active area of work for us. So some of the things we've discovered is that our rule-based approaches are imperfect. We have a lot of false positives. We really need to develop the algorithms require gold standard labeled data sets. So we're working towards being able to annotate text data in order to develop these or use off-the-shelf algorithms. There is a unique nature of medical notes. So there's a lot of duplication and variation in formatting. So a lot of the, I guess, language dictionaries out there are based on clean data, and they're not built for medical notes. There's a sparsity of true cases within large data sets. So if you're looking for a particular feature, so for instance, a risk factor for diabetes, that may not be well captured in a cohort of patients presenting with just 2 emergencies. So you need to, so there's a sparsity of cases within these documents. And there's also a huge range of documents of notes types in the EMR. So there's ED assessments, discharge summaries, progress notes, triage forms, and they're all very different in their structure. So this next slide should give you an idea of our next part of our exploration into trying to, I guess, standardize some of our text mining approaches. And it's just highlighting, I guess, the variability of this work. So we started off with the triage form. We wanted to look at the ED assessment and the discharge summaries just for presenting problems. So this is to show you that in over 132,000, I guess 64,000 ED assessments and 120,000 discharge summaries, there were over 132,000 different section headings. So we were interested in the section heading for presenting complaint, but to kind of explore this, we wanted to know how are these notes structured, and they're all very variable. So these top ones are ones that are, I guess, structured in the template, but then there's other ones which aren't in the template. And these small differences can cause new section headings to be identified. So for instance, if we want to look at medications, are we interested in medications or discharge medications? Plan, impression and plan are all similar. And so some standardization of the section names would help. And what this one shows is that we wanted to look for presenting symptoms, and there were over 200 different ways that chief complaint or presenting complaint could be were described. And so we would have to aggregate all these different section names in order to, I guess, group them together in order for us to identify after those section names all the presenting symptoms. So this is just kind of the exploration that we've been doing in order to progress this work. So my last slide is really to talk about how to extract this data and what type of skill sets are required. So really this is a harmony between health data domain expertise, technology skills and analytics skills. And really we've been working, this is a whole pipeline of activity. And so in order to do this successfully, you really do need an EMR developer, a data architect, someone who can write a CCL script to extract data from the Cerner EMR system, if that's what you're using. If you're using other information systems that need to be linked together, you'll need someone who can access those information systems and link it to the Cerner EMR extracts. I work with software and data engineers a lot. That's how we wrangle all those raw data tables into insight, and also visualization as well. And some of these skills already reside within local health districts, so in either analysis departments or ICT departments or in the eMR team. But it's really the bringing together of these groups that really enables insight to occur. So I think this is really an exciting area to be in. It's a fantastic opportunity for clinicians, analytics professionals, technology professionals to work together to really bring some value from this data and answer insights that are required by the health system. And this is kind of an example of what we've been doing, which is like we've kind of cracked the nut slightly. This probably more is like a sledgehammer, but this is really where we're heading, which is towards virtual clinical registries, being able to use this information for audit and benchmarking and close to real-time audit and feedback. And the following speaker after me will, Jane, is going to talk more about this real-time audit and feedback process. So thank you.
Thank you, Charmaine, for a fantastic introduction to the challenges and potential of using eMR data. Thank you very much.